Minister Radek Sikorski was invited to the House of Lords to deliver a speech on the consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine for the UK's relations with the European Union.
European Affairs Committee inquiry into the implications of the situation in Ukraine for UK-EU relations. We're delighted to have with us today two very distinguished members of the European Parliament, Madame Nathalie Loiseau and Radek Sikorski.
Minister Sikorski praised the British for quick decisions regarding arms support for Ukraine. He also talked about cooperation between Great Britain and the European Union in the field of security.
I'd like to endorse every word of Chairman Loiseau and just supplement that by saying that when you compare the contributions of the European Union and the United States, you should remember the difference in constitutions. Everything in the United States goes through Washington. If you add what EU institutions have done and the member states, then you get very similar numbers, roughly 76 billion euros so far. I believe Britain has had two major influences on the way that the European Union has dealt with the war against Ukraine. Number one, Britain was early in supplying defensive weapons to Ukraine. This is your advantage. We are much bigger, we have more money, but we are slow. You can act faster. And you can encourage other allies to do the right thing. And by supplying NLAW's anti-tank missiles early on, you encouraged other Europeans to supply other types of weapons. I believe this is an honorable and very useful role that Britain could play. Mm-hmm. And the second influence is paradoxical. Chairman Loiseau mentioned the European Peace Facility. This is our wonderfully named defense budget. Which is 7 billion in this multi-annual financial framework. It was supposed to be originally 14 billion. We have mostly spent it on weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Think what a revolution this is. 3 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for the EU to actually buy weapons to deliver to a third country. And of course, this facility, this budget, would never have been created if Britain was still a member of the EU. So this is a real benefit of Brexit.
Bravo!
Formats. First is what we have with the United States, the Trade and Technology Council, where we discuss common standards, where we exchange information about incoming investments and outgoing investments, where we try to set minimum ethical standards for production, research, and other issues, which I hope will do the job that the COCOM did during the Cold War, of denying the bad actors some of the advantages of the free world. And just as in those days, it should be like-minded democracies. So I believe that not only Britain, but Canada, South Korea, Japan, Australia could be included. And then it would be the United West being much more influential. And on EU-UK, I believe the European defense is coming because the peoples of Europe are demanding a second insurance policy. And we are in the process of building up a reinforced brigade, which of course will only supplement what NATO does, but it would be capable of addressing crises just on the other side of the Mediterranean or in the Balkans or perhaps with satrapies such as Belarus. It can't do NATO's job, but it could do lower order tasks. And from my conversations in Washington at the Pentagon recently, I draw the conclusions that the US would be strongly in favor of it, that they would be pleased for us to share the burden, particularly if they were to get engaged in the Pacific. And Britain, of course, would be a very valuable, in my view, partner in that because defense is your strong asset. The difficulty would be to find the institutional framework because the DNA of the EU is to differentiate between members and non-members. And so this requires legal and political work, and I don't have the answer of how it could be done, but it should be done. I have argued for it from the rostrum in Strasbourg and Brussels, and I talked to people at the Commission, and whereas I can't tell you what the balance of opinion is, but certainly people perk up and are interested. There is an obvious argument for increasing its effectiveness. Mm-hmm. I would let it run for a little while to see how effective it is in its current form, and then I think we'll be ready to consider inviting fellow democracies. Well, I understand that our sanctions apply to both the selling of Russian goods and Russia buying goods. So no sanctions are perfect, but certainly Russian foreign income from the sale of its oil and gas have dropped because they are having to sell to intermediaries or to alternative markets such as India and China at a huge discount. So Mr. Putin is having less money to prosecute his war. But military analysts tell me that our sanctions are more effective in restricting, for example, chips for Russia to be able to build missiles and other advanced weapons. And here I think we can be quite effective. And I think the battlefield shows that Russia is paying a price. I think if 3 years ago we were in this room and we speculated that Russia might be having to turn for high-quality weapons to Iran, for ammunition to North Korea, we would not have believed it, and yet it's a reality today. I was personally very pleased to see the G7 decision, in which, of course, both the UK and the EU participated, to decide that Russia will only regain access to its frozen central bank reserves when she pays reparations to Ukraine. This is crucial. And secondly, I would urge the UK to keep in mind that we need to prevent Russia from rebuilding its army when it's still engaged in hostile activities against its neighbors. I think it would be wonderful if we could coordinate our actions against tax havens. Neither you nor we ever legislate for these things to be created. You only need them to hide wealth and to avoid taxation. It is estimated that $50 trillion is hidden away in tax havens. Think of what we could do with the money if it was properly taxed or brought back home. And much of it is managed through powers of attorney from European financial centers. Obviously, it would require common action. I'm not sure what scope there is, but I'm very frustrated by the fact that we are making the same mistakes on both sides of the channel. Namely, some of our decision makers still think that this war will go away and will not be a medium to long-term challenge. And I think it is. And therefore, we have not yet properly ramped up the production of equipment and ammunition. We are still sending to Ukraine what we've had in our stocks. And we need to realize that for companies to restart production lines, they need to be sure that this will not be for a year or two, but either for a decade, or that they will be paid for maintaining the production lines, because otherwise they can't make investment decisions. And people who know tell me that this has not yet happened, and that we are running dangerously low on our stocks, and that Russia perhaps is ramping up towards wartime type of production schedules and state of industry faster than we are. And that's not good at all. But from what I know, the 40-something programs that were supposed to create defense capabilities that are financed by the European Defense Agency have not produced anything of value yet. Not a single piece of equipment has yet been brought into production, let alone into our armed forces. And I'm frustrated by that. I go to Ukraine on a regular basis. Once a quarter, I take some used pickups, including from the UK, to the front to be used as ambulances and so on. And a month ago, I was near Bakhmut with the 26th Ukrainian Brigade using Polish howitzers and shooting with US Excalibur ammunition, the gliding precision shells, 155 millimeter caliber. Ukrainian team, Polish howitzer, American ammunition. Great interoperability. When discussing this, I would urge you to remember that Ukraine is not as destroyed as it looks on the telly. When you drive through Ukraine, on 80% of its territory, the state works. On one of the return journeys from the front with my pickups, I got a speeding ticket. And more than that,
made you happy?
It was only 5K over, and what I was particularly impressed was I tried to pay it in cash. No, we don't handle cash. You go to the local bank. Good. Secondly, remember that Ukraine is already implementing the association agreement with the EU, which was initialed under the Polish presidency in 2013, but has not yet implemented it in full. They already have visa-free access to the EU. They are beginning to enter the single market, but there's still work to be done. And yes, we are proud of our conditionality because it works. But the third and perhaps most important thing to remember is that Ukraine will not be a victim country that needs outside assistance for rebuilding. Obviously, the assistance will be very useful. The electrical grid will be under a furious Russian attack this winter, for example, and they need the help now. But once the fighting stops, it'll be boomtown. This is a potentially really rich country. They have huge surplus. Once they recover the Zaporozhye nuclear plant, which is the largest in Europe, they are now synchronized with the European grid. There are days on which already now they export electricity, and they'll have a huge surplus. They have the best soils in Europe. The reason why we have this issue with Ukrainian grain is that they have these Texas-size farms with some of the best soil in Europe. They have a first-class IT industry. The experience they are gaining from software that allows you not just to find the best targets, but to prioritize which targets to strike with, which weapons, in order to get the best economic ratio. This is the wars of the future. They will be training us. What kept Ukraine back for the 30 years was the institutional weakness and the corruption. But if they address that, if they have acquis communautaire, if investors feel secure in Ukraine, huge opportunities, and I expect huge inflow of private investment. My understanding of European strategic autonomy is the same as a former British Prime Minister's. Not a super-state, but a superpower.
Yes.
When you are dealing with China, where they have cities with the population of medium-sized European countries, then you know that vis-à-vis China, we can only have influence if we stick together.
After the hearing in the British Parliament, Minister Sikorski went to the headquarters of the European Union Representative Office in Great Britain to meet with European expats living in the United Kingdom.
European integration started between the Germans and the French, not out of love, out of a reflection that maybe we could do it another way. Maybe it's not worth doing it again. It was a reconciliation between enemies, deciding that pooling sovereignty is better than this slaughter. And that I think is important reflection that we have not internalized in Poland. You know, what I worry about is that over the last 15 years, we've made the argument for Europe too much on economic grounds. You know, we are getting this money from Brussels, so let's be in favor while the balance of wire transfers is in our favor. We need to understand that before there was agricultural policy, before there were cohesion funds, there were other more important reasons for European integration. But look, if Polish courts become subjugated, other European courts will stop respecting them. The European Union depends on all institutions in all member states being of equivalent quality and trusting one another. Without that, you cannot have a European Union, and you certainly cannot have a single market. Let me give you an example. When the British cabinet was deciding about the referendum, this is not my speculation, this is my knowledge. The majority of the cabinet had absolutely no idea of the difference between a free trade zone and a single market. They didn't know. The single market doesn't just mean that there are no customs barriers. That's easy. The single market means that there are no bureaucratic barriers whatsoever. That everything is equivalent. In fact, I believe that the legal term for the single market is internal market. So it's as if we were one country. So just like in Poland, if a veterinarian stamps, you know, a lump of meat that it's healthy, it is respected in another part of Poland. In a single market, it is respected in another part of Europe. And for an Italian consumer to want to eat a Polish pig, they have their own very good ones, they have to trust that the stamp of the Polish veterinarian is a valid one, that he didn't just take a bribe, but that it is a stamp of quality. If they lose faith, if they lose trust, they will refuse to take them. And it applies to everything.
Is it the same with visas?
Exactly the same with visas, with university degrees, with the doctor's qualifications, with literally everything. Sure, and you know, we already have this. Courts in Ireland and in Holland are beginning to question Polish European arrest warrants because they suspect that Polish judges are under pressure. And and this visa scandal has a huge potential for exactly for that. If other countries start suspecting that you can buy a Polish Schengen visa at a market in Dar es Salaam, then they'll stop respecting them. And then Poland is, at least in this sense, excluded from Schengen. It would be terrible. And I can guarantee you one thing, that if the Germans were selling Schengen visas and some people with German Schengen visas were coming to Poland, Kaczynski would be the first to say, bring back border controls. Okay? Well, what I hear in the corridors of Brussels is that if Kaczynski fulfills his pledge to subjugate Polish courts, Poland will be deprived not only of the recovery plan money, but of the regular cohesion funds. That's huge. It would be terrible. You know, this is the last decade in which we are net beneficiaries. And there are, you know, we're almost there, but we need this last injection of money to build a European class infrastructure, finish it. And, you know, we're talking about money to the tune of 100 million euros per powiat. It's real money. You can do a lot with that. We're proud of that. So that's something that they might still do. But you know, as the EU, we are a confederation. You know, we don't have a central authority. The European Commission is a sort of hybrid between a government and a civil service. Brussels can't send the police and force a member state to do what it doesn't want to do. It didn't occur to people who are voting for enlargement to include us that once you've fulfilled democratic criteria, the Copenhagen criteria, a country, you know, that fought for freedom heroically would want to dismantle checks and balances and the rule of law. It just didn't occur to anybody. We now have this mechanism of review of rule of law in all member states. Just it's sort of modeled on the review of finances. But you know, if a country, you know, really does the nationalist thing and says no, there's not much you can do. In the end, you can just then functionally expel the country from one circle of integration after another. By breaching treaties, by breaching our own constitution, by breaching rule of law, we have re-alerted Western Europeans that democracy is less secure in post-communist Europe. And therefore they will be doubly cautious in inviting other post-communist, large, poor countries into the EU. And vice versa. The best thing that the PiS government could do for Ukraine is to end its stupid Cold War with Brussels. You know, there is a joke in Brussels. It's a real cruel one. My sense of humor has landed me in trouble many times before, but I'll risk it. They say the British are having to pay 45 billion euros to leave the European Union. Poland will be expelled for free. One thing that I feared that might happen, which hasn't happened, and the chances were not huge, but not zero either, that Britain would be so disgruntled and so set against Europe that it might actually get closer to Russia. Because Russia has been an ally of this country on numerous occasions. Against Napoleon, against the Kaiser, against... and I thought that because of London as a place where the Russians like to launder their money, that there would be a tilt that way. And that hasn't happened, thank God. But other than that, what's happened was predictable and predicted. Brexit works as a slow puncture on the British economy. You know, there wasn't a cliff edge drop. It's just that millions of transactions are harder to make, and therefore business is slowed and many opportunities are forgone. You know, I used to, you know, while living in Poland, you know, I would buy many things from Amazon.co.uk. Now I can't. Because it's as if you were importing from the US or India. You have to go through customs procedures. And it's just unpleasant. So I try to buy from Ireland now. And it's affected areas that I hadn't even thought about. You know, I didn't know that Brexit would affect all kinds of performers and arts. You know, musicians need work visas now, absurd. You know what it's affected that I would never have predicted? Antiquities market. You know, Paris. You know, when you look at Christie's or Sotheby's, the list is now bigger in Paris than in London. Most of the American banks have now quietly moved their trading floors to Paris. You know, with huge loss to the British Exchequer. It's drained life out of the British economy. Do you know what I was shocked by? Genuinely shocked by. I couldn't believe I had to recheck the figures. The London Stock Exchange now has a smaller capitalization than Paris. I thought it was 10 times bigger. It's smaller now. It's incredible. Not good.
So I think there are really words that can give us some kind of hope and inspire all of us for what is to come. And I think with these words we can now move on to a more social life.
After a very interesting discussion, it was time for behind-the-scenes talks. I managed to persuade Minister Sikorski to talk about today's hearing in the British Parliament.
I would like to ask about today's meeting in the House of Lords. Did you talk about Ukraine?
We talked about the impact of Russian aggression against Ukraine on the European Union and on European-British cooperation.
How do the British assess the European position?
The British thanked us, so I guess we contributed something. In any case, the European Union already had a defense budget, so the EU was able to help Ukraine. As you know, as long as Great Britain was a member of the European Union, it blocked the development of a common defense policy.
Noticed any small successes achieved as a result of Brexit?
Yes, but not for Great Britain.
Were you a representative of the European Union at the meeting?
Yes, as a member of the European Parliament, and headed of the delegation for relations between the European Union and the United States.
I understand that Ukraine can be sure that there is unity on aid between the European Union, Great Britain and the United States.
Yes, this is an issue on which we as the West are united. Putin cannot win this, because he has broken some treaties, some European taboos, and some rules that we established after 2 bloody wars.
So can we conclude that we are waiting for victory?
May it be so. I think this is also an opportunity for Russia. A chance to abandon dreams of returning to the empire and live in a normal country. Maybe even a reforming country.